Look at the line there. That's like Ladies and gentlemen, as you're finding your seats for the service, I'd like to ask that you turn your cell phones off or on silent. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, interment will take place at Arbor Crest Cemetery. The cemetery is located at 2521 Immediately following interment, there will be a Shiva gathering at Beth Israel congregation. Family and friends will be gathering on Thursday and Friday at the residence of Prue Rosenthal, 505 East Huron, apartment 803 in Ann Arbor.
You hear through your phone?
Until 8:30.
Unplug
Services
this.
will be held both days at 7 p.m. Guests are encouraged to utilize the Liberty Square parking garage at 5
Not
East Washington.
That sucks.
It is suggested that those who wish to further honor the memory of Evie Lichter may
I wonder if all the microphones are connected for Zoom.
Congregation of Ann Arbor, or the
Everybody's in the same position.
University of Michigan. All this information will be on our
Hi, everyone. I am trying to fix it. If you could
Yes.
please be muted. I am trying to fix this, though.
All right.
Eight laharohog ve'eight lirpo, eight leaf rohots ve'eight leaf not, eight leaf kohot ve'eight lischok, eight sephod ve'eight rekod. Always begin with words of Scripture. These are the words of Ecclesiastes of Kohelet. There's a time for every human for every experience under heaven. There's a time to be
It's really
born
bad.
and a time to die. A time for planting, a time for uprooting the planted. There's a time for hurting and a time for healing, a time for tearing down, a time for the projects of building up anew, a time for weeping and a time for laughter, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones, a time for gathering them up and putting them on the stone, a time for embracing, a time for refraining, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for ripping and a time for sewing back up, a time for silence and a time for speaking. This is a time for ripping. It's a time for ripping of the heart and living with that rip through the journey of grief for all of us, and most especially for Allan. In Jewish tradition, one would wear their ripped clothing for the entire period of mourning. And then at the end, they would sew it up in such a way that you could still see that it had been ripped and it was sewn up. So that everywhere you went, and often people only had a few sets of clothing, they could see how bereaved you've been in your life. And those with other tears sewn up would meet those with tears sewn up. And they would share a mutual understanding. This is a time for tearing and a time to prepare for the time of sewing up. And there's a time for silence, and there is a time for speaking in grief. And the Jewish tradition is that today is that time for speaking. I want to start with the tearing. I'm going to ask Sue Ellen and Elwood and Allan to rise and to repeat after me. Baruch atah Adonai, Dayan ha'emet. Blessed be Adonai, who is the true judge and who knows loyalty. And would you tear upward along the rib? According to the Talmud, the sound of that tear goes straight to heaven, bypassing all possible gates, along with the sound of the shofar and the sounds of the cries of the poor. We may be seated. Additional words from the biblical period, these come from Ben Sira. We are all destined to die. We share it with all who have ever lived. We share it with all who ever will be. We should cry, and we should not hide our grief. We should not restrain our mourning, as we also know that continuing sorrow is not what they want of us. The dead should be at peace, and their memory should be a source of peace, and we should be consoled when their soul departs. For death is better than a life of pain. An eternal rest is better than constant sickness. And so let us not seek to understand what is too difficult for us, nor try to reveal the mysteries of what is hidden from us, nor be preoccupied with what is beyond. Because in this life we are already shown more than we can embrace and comprehend. I think those would be, especially those final words, would be words that Evie would be sharing with all of us. And we all know why we're here. To remember with love, and I'm trying not to start crying. I got as many boxes of tissues as I could. The source of so many of our inspiration. Person who taught us how to live. Someone who made us feel that a friend is within a bond as strong as family, our beloved Evie Lichter, Kreindl Chava Bat Yitzchak Udevora. I know that she would want me to be expressing on behalf of all of us our condolences to Allan in their 35 years of marriage, to her siblings, to Ellen Simon and Elwood, to Woody, and through marriage to Arthur and Carol, to really her siblings, Carolyn and Paul Lichter, to her many nieces and nephews, Joshua, Kate, and Emily Broder, and Meredith, and through marriage to Mark, and Evan Simon, and Lori Lichter. And I think she'd want me to express my condolences to her many friends who are too numerous to name individually, who are as much family as family can be. Though Evie sometimes just called you my girlfriends, you were that and far more. Representing just the tip of the iceberg, I want to express my condolences to Joan, Hillary, and Prue, for I know your hearts are broken along with all of Evie's girlfriends. And can some of us men count ourselves as her girlfriends? We have words of honor today. We're going to begin with Joan Lowenstein, and then we'll hear from Evie's sister, Sue Ellen, and then hopefully from Allan, and then I will conclude the speakers for this event. And when we gather for Shiva, I hope to hear your voices added to our own. Joan. With her wing women, crew, and Hillary.
The crew. It's kind of Evie's last laugh that you can't really see us because of the flowers that she selected. If you're here today, it may be because at some point you lived within a 60-mile radius of Evie Lichter. You might have been trying to make a decision at the farmer's market, or waiting in line for the bathroom at Michigan Stadium, or some other random location, and found yourself approached by a very bubbly, engaging woman who started talking to you, and 5 minutes later elicited all the secrets you thought you'd never tell anyone. That's how I met Evie around 35 years ago, and the random location was the YMCA swimming pool, where swimming instructor Rita Gelman, who's here, was teaching our son, thereafter always referred to as Baby Julian, how to swim. I don't know why Evie was there, but all of a sudden, this lovely redheaded woman asked my name and started up a conversation in the pool, in the water. I remember looking for that curly red hair wherever I went and finding it in a lot of places that I wanted to be. I distinctly remember admiring those curls sitting behind Evie and Allan at the JCC the first time Tom Friedman, then an unknown journalist, came to speak here. Evie and I became friends, and of course, because the world of Jews and Michigan people is a small one, we had all kinds of connections. Her cousin Gail, who had known my husband before I had, her brother-in-law Paul, the chair of my husband's department. But the real connections that affected our lives so much weren't just accidental. Evie was the catalyst who got the three of us involved in Jewish Federation, which she chaired, the Women's Division, Women's Seder, Missions to Israel, a huge part of our lives as leaders in this Jewish community was not suggested but mandated by Evie. I really didn't know much about her pre-Ann Arbor life, but she did tell me about living in Chicago, teaching in an inner city school, owning property there. She didn't grow up with the life of luxury, and she amazed all of us with how she could adapt to almost any situation. When she married Allan, she willingly took on half of his job as department chair and then dean, being the person who was in charge of events like faculty parties, recruitment dinners, socializing at medical meetings. She could elegantly appoint beautiful homes in Ann Arbor, Washington, and Longboat Key. And here's a factoid some of you may not remember. She was my campaign manager when I ran for city council. We sometimes said it was a little bit like Lucy and Ethel. We all have Evie stories, usually about something that we thought was totally outlandish, but then we would later imitate. So here's one. Evie had to buy a gift for a visiting lecturer or departing staff member, I don't remember which it was, and we went to the Old Borders Books, which was in the Jacobson's building on Liberty. So we found a really nice art book that had an all-black cover. We were being helped by one of the Borders employees, you remember them, and Evie pointed out that this cover had a fingerprint on it. There wasn't another copy, and Evie really wanted that book. So, of course, she convinced them to give her a discount. That moxie that I learned from her, and we all learned, has come in handy many times since. When I said Evie could adapt to anything, that was never more true than when she got sick. She figured out how to cope, and she broadened her life in ways none of us expected. She was incredibly creative and dove into pottery and other art forms, and it wasn't like that paint-by-number stuff at camp. She created beautiful works of art and also purchased and appreciated beautiful works of art. She organized cooking and dinner groups. She learned how to play bridge, and she got really good at it. Nothing stopped her until it finally did. Evie had her own argot, certain terms that she created and have become part of our lexicon. A home renovation, and there were many, was a cashectomy. A recipe that was way too much trouble was a to-do. And a somewhat difficult person was a Lodette. Evie herself could sometimes be a Lodette, and she knew it, and we'd all laugh together about how we loved each other anyway. We'll still do that, thinking about the good times, and we'll think of Evie.
Well done. Well done.
We invite up Sue Ellen Simon.
So for those of you who don't know me, I am Sue Ellen Simon, Evie's sister. And at Evie's request, Allan asked me, I think yesterday, somewhere within the last 24 hours, to speak at her funeral, which really was a low blow, because Evie was the orator of the family. She loved the role. She liked being out there with everybody. I'm a little more subtle and laid back. And then we have Woody, who quietly gave us leadership and guidance. And I'm sure that's where Evie got it from. And it was really wonderful. And I just want to speak to the fact that we are one family. We are the Goldmans. We are the Kesslers. We are the Smiths, the Ganses, the Berlins. We are the Schwartzes. We are the Epsteins, the Goods, the Lichters. We are one family, and we stand together. And we have watched Evie, or should I start with Karen Simon, who she was in elementary school and as a young child. Those of us who knew her then, she was just little Karen Simon. Bubbly, giggly, funny. Oh my gosh, was she funny. She made us laugh all the time. And then she went to high school. And she said, I think I'm going to be Evie. Not yet. Karen Eve Simon. So she spent her high school years, and those of you know her as Karen Eve Simon. I see some head shaking in the gallery out there because that is how we knew her. And again, she was funny and giggly and engaging and kept everyone together. And then she met her dear Allan. Wow. They actually met in high school. And for some reason, the cosmos took them apart for a little while. And then they got back together. And there was the new, independent, strong Evie Lichter, who developed those qualities all through her life. And we loved her at each stage of her life. And then there was Evie Lichter as the adult, who was feisty, independent. She was her own person. She shared her organizational skills with friends, family. She showed leadership within the community. We are one family. She is our Evie Lichter. As a sister and a cousin, wow, was she stellar. We grew up in a different time than now. We actually could walk to school, and the Schwartzes and the Simons shared so many holidays and after-school activities, and some of us even college together. And then there's Gail. Gail Schwartz Sugar, our first cousin, who became Evie's canasta partner, bridge partner, and another good bridge player. Those Schwartzes, they could handle all those numbers. And Evie shared all those pieces with her cousins, and with Woody and I, and Carol and Arthur. And then she became Aunt Evie, which she shared so much. I can't really believe it now, but I do recall putting my kids on a plane when they were young and going to visit Evie and going to visit their grandparents. And again, it was a different time. But when they got to Evie's, when she was in Chicago, she took them to museums, she took them to health classes, she exposed them to the light that shines above us. She is our Evie Lichter, our one family. She also housed them at Michigan with Allan. Several of the kids went to Michigan. I think I have a sniffle, Evie. Oh, come stay at the house. Evie, I'm hungry. Come for dinner. She was engaging and loving. And then she sent pictures of Allan at all these wonderful events. Thank God you got awards, otherwise I'd have no social life. And I would see Evie standing right next to Allan saying, okay, that's the one who's married too. This is the department head who comes from this city. She really was right there holding Allan up when he was just had no words. And Allan always had words. So there was Evie, one family, once again, supporting each other. Evie had many blessings in her life. Health was not one of them. But health did not take her down. She proved to be strong, and courageous. She gave an order, and I'll put it that way, for us to have Passover this year because we weren't going to have it as a family this year for the first time. And Evie said, Allan and I are coming in early. Are you hosting Passover? She already knew I wasn't. And the family, once again, we are one family. We rallied. We took out those very fabulous China Costco dishes. We ordered from who knows where. And the important piece is that we were family. We had our little ones, Benjamin and Aria. Meredith, we missed you and your family. We had Carol and Woody and Evan. And again, we were one family, grateful to be together. Evie had a lot of joyous times, and she leaves us with a heart full of joy. We should remember her in that vein. Evie lived by her own tenets. And although we never really discussed them, I know she had her special things with the girls. I think each day Evie let go of anger. I think each day Evie let go of fear. I believe that each day she worked diligently with purpose. And I believe that each day she lived in kindness. And I also believe that each day she lived in gratitude. Evie, we will miss you. We are one family.
We invite Allan to share some words.
I'm used to speaking. I've spoken in lecture halls, in conferences all over the country, all around the world. This is a tough one. I'm going to try to get through this, and you'll bear with me. I asked Rabbi Dobberson, I said, what happens when a speaker at this event just breaks down and can't continue? He said, tears are some of the most important expressions. So, bear with me. So I'm speaking here today for two reasons. First, because Evie asked me to. It may come as no surprise to those of you who knew her well that she planned every aspect of this funeral, her burial and the Shiva. Second, I'm speaking because I wanted to tell you a bit more about this remarkable woman. Evie and I went out on a fix-up in late 1963, and we dated into the summer of '64, 60 years ago. It was a lovely little romance, but I was off to college, and she was staying behind in her senior year of high school. And so we parted ways for 20 years. Evie then went to Michigan State, and following graduation in 1965, she set off for Chicago to make her way in the world on her own. No one greased the skids. Nothing was wired in for her. She just set out on her path, and she built a career. She first worked at a bank in customer relations, and then taught school, and then as a counselor in Planned Parenthood, and then at Cook County Hospital. But then she moved on to become a senior systems analyst at Michael Reese Hospital, where she worked for over 7 years, helping to install one of the earliest physician order entry and results reporting computer system, as well as working on other large-scale computing projects throughout the hospital. It was that range of hospital and computer experience that made her attractive to Ernst and Winnie, one of the big 8 accounting and consulting firms. They needed a talented person to go on site and visit various clients and advise them about this new world of computerization in medicine. And they hired Evie in October of 1984. So 15 years, starting from scratch, completely on her own, she built that career. She was on the right track and right at the start of the electronic healthcare revolution, working at one of the top firms in the country. She was destined to be a star. But life had other plans for her. Because in 1986, she was assigned a new consulting engagement. Where? At the University of Michigan Hospital. When she would get to a new city for work, she always tried to look up old friends and acquaintances to help make the trips less lonely. One day that spring, on the other end of my office phone line, was Evie, telling me she was working at the hospital and maybe we could grab a cup of coffee. I said yes, and that encounter changed our lives. I still recall her walking into the cafeteria and walking up to me. She was wearing a chic brown suit, bright red glasses, and that amazing crop of red hair, and her smile. She was bright and engaging and witty and charming and delightful to be with, and I fell head over heels in love. We started a commuter romance. I took weekend trips to Chicago whenever I could, and she saw me when she was on site for work. In January 1988, Evie left her job at Ernst & Whinney and took the plunge and moved to Ann Arbor. All because she wandered into hospital computing, and that led her to consulting, and that led her to me, Bashert. We bought a home on Belmont Road and started to renovate it, and things were going great. There was just one small catch. I did not want to get married. I had been through a divorce, and I figured Evie and I could live happily ever after without that silly formality. Evie took in that information, and after thinking about it for a millisecond, she looked at me and she said, "Either you're going to marry me right now, or I'm going to take the morning train back to Chicago." I considered that, but I knew this was the end of the subject. It was pure Evie. She knew what she wanted, she decided, and that was that. I got down on one knee in our bathroom and proposed to her. We were married on the back deck of our home on August 28th, 1988. From that point on, Evie dove into Ann Arbor. Her professional career was over, but her volunteer careers were just starting. As you heard, she joined the Federation board, led the Women's Division, and then the annual campaign for 2 years, and then was president of the Federation. Through that work, she became so close with Prue and Joan and Hillary, and a host of other women here in Michigan and around the country. She served on the steering committee at EMU Hillel. She was the membership chair for Hadassah, and in that role she helped establish a group called 40-something. This program won a national award for outreach, and this group still gets together. While doing all of that, she obtained graduate certificates in gerontology and in mediation. She was a force of nature. On top of that, she ran our household and our lives. I was busy at the hospital, so every single social interaction, family interaction, any kind of interaction was set up and coordinated by Evie. She was my partner in recruiting new faculty, new department chairs, and the many social and celebratory events at the school benefited from her touch. And she supervised a lengthy set of renovation projects for nearly 20 years. I'm not blowing smoke here. I could not have achieved what I achieved in my career were it not for Evie's help, advice, and guidance. Her roots in Ann Arbor grew deep, and yet when my deanship was ending and coming to a close and I was offered a position at our Medical Professional Society in Washington, D.C., she embraced that challenge. We sold the house. She found us a lovely condominium in D.C. to move into. There she became an avid bridge player, and she accelerated her work in pottery, revealing herself to be a fine artist. She also volunteered to be a docent at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. This involved far more than just showing up. Docents take a rigorous course in the Holocaust and then write a paper discussing what their unique approach would be to taking groups through the museum. It took months of effort, but she successfully obtained her certification to lead tours and excelled at it. Evie loved people, and she especially enjoyed talking to complete strangers. This typically drove me batty. We moved to D.C. the week between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. When we got to D.C., we had shul tickets, thanks to Beth Israel, but no other holiday plans. One afternoon during that time, Evie walked over to the nearby Trader Joe's to get some things, and when she came back, she informed me that we now had not one, but 2 invitations to break the fast. From chatting in the grocery line at Trader's. We spent 10 years in D.C., and we retired in 2016, and we split our time between Ann Arbor and Longboat Key. And while she was doing all these amazing things over the course of her life, accomplishing so much and making friends far and wide, she was relentlessly confronted with serious health challenges. It started with rheumatoid arthritis 38 years ago, 4 to 5 daily meds plus a weekly injection. Then a cancer in 2004, requiring major treatment, which left her with several chronic long-term complications. We were in the emergency department typically twice a year, with hospitalization associated with many of those visits. Through all that, she rarely complained and carried on so valiantly and so bravely. But in the fall of 2020, 16 years after her cancer treatment, the cancer recurred. She did all right for a while on oral meds, but things slowly progressed. Then this January, a heart attack was followed by a stroke, and then in late April, a second heart attack. It was finally too much, and she could struggle no longer. We talked about this openly and frankly. She knew the end was coming, and she welcomed the relief it would bring. She embraced life right up to the end. And then the end came. I held her hand while she took her last breath. I could go on and on about this wonderful woman, and Shiva, together, we will share more stories. We lost an incredibly bright light. Her absence leaves a hole. I will miss her dearly.
I'd like to share a few words on behalf of the Jewish tradition, on behalf of Torah. As we heard from Sue Ellen, Evie started out life as Karen Simon. In Hebrew, that's Krendel Chava, Karen Eve. Krendel is Yiddish for crown. The name carries a sense of honor, authority, and dignity. The name fits Evie, if you ask me. From her crown of red hair and then brilliant white, she actually, to me, was a woman befitting of honor, authority, and dignity. In her presence, we knew who was in charge, who wore the crown. But Evie wouldn't want to be thought of that way, and she clearly didn't, as she made that her hidden name, her invisible crown, while she embraced Chava, life, Chava, living life to the fullest, Chava, bestowing life and the love of life on others. And that was Evie. When Sue Ellen told her father that she was leaving for Chicago, her father said, "No, you aren't." And so Sue Ellen didn't. When Evie said, "After graduation, I'm moving to Chicago," and her father said, "No, you aren't," Evie said, "Oh, yes, I am." And she did. Like the name change, she chose who she wanted to be. Somehow she always had the answers. As Woody told me, he said, "Am I allowed to say she was rather like Mary Tyler Moore?" When everyone else was doing more or less what was conventional, Evie tossed her crown in the air and moved to the big city as if it was nothing. I'll go where I want to go. Her famous brownstone in Wrigleyville is fixed in the minds of all who spent time there, from the beautiful things that filled it, like her other homes, to the clawfoot tub, to the old school radiator. To be brought into that space that so many as the nieces and nephews know was to be brought into Evie's life. It meant meeting her train of friends, and there always was a train of friends. It meant seeing a chorus line or taking yoga with the later quite famous Anne Rudolph, who established the School of Modern Body Education and Dance far ahead of her time. The message Woody remembers so well: get out of your comfort zone and go live in the world. She exchanged Crandall for Chava. As we all know, there was something contagious about being in her orbit. Somehow she could effortlessly get everyone, including you, moving in the same direction. In Ann Arbor, that included, as we heard, the famous 90s and after Federation leadership. Remember that bus of the fabulous foursome of Evie, Joan, Hillary, and Prue, so often with Carolyn's example and Carol Smokler, starting and building so much of the Ann Arbor Jewish community that stands today. I would love to make it serious how important that work was, but mostly people remember it as a whole lot of fun. As Hillary put it to me, Evie was like flypaper. People just stuck to her. Whatever direction or project Evie wanted to take on, you wanted to get on the bus with her. Her passion, her curiosity, her excitement about the projects, or almost immediately her excitement about our projects, whatever they were, she made it fun, and you knew it would be collaborative. Projects for Federation, the building up of the Hebrew Day School, Jewish Family Service, JCC, Women's Division, Hadassah, the settling of Russian emigres, the Women's Seder, the list goes on and on. And in the rare instances when things didn't work out, Evie had the uncanny ability to guffaw at herself. She would say things like, "I didn't know it could be this bad." As with Joan's first run for city council, where Evie was her campaign manager, when Joan lost decisively, Evie turned to her and said, "Well, you didn't tell me we could lose." And so Joan ran again and won, with Evie again as her manager. I love the story that Joan told of her meeting with Evie at Rita's Mommy and Me swimming class, and they became fast friends. And one of my favorite parts of that story she left out, which is, I kept wondering, why is she in the pool? Where's the baby? Isn't she supposed to have a baby with her? Her ability to name the discomfort with, "I didn't know it could be this bad," and then move on, was typical of how Evie faced her considerable health challenges. She was very private of how uncomfortable she was in her years of discomfort, and for most of her friends, she just wanted to be treated the same, so she was the same. She decided who she was. Life needs to be lived, Chava, not stopped. And for a few confidants, she would find similar words to, I didn't know it could be this bad. And those similar words usually contained expletives I may not recite on the bima. We all know what they were. I have to say, Evie, you had a gift for using expletives perfectly. Not too many, not too few, and always they hit the nail on the head. After all, her notebook was emblazoned with the words, "Let's beat the out of cancer." And after she voiced how things were bad, now it was time to move on. As Prue shared with me, Evie was teaching us all how to live. She was teaching us how to treat people as fully who they are, not sick versions of themselves. To be with Evie was to always be learning how to live. Chava. I know it was true of me. She taught me to put aside our errors and embrace being inclusive, adventurous, good, normal people, not wearing a crown. Play bridge, play canasta, maj, create pottery or collage and pour yourself into it. If you have something to say, just be direct. And when things don't go your way, you know you can just be pissed off. Or, as Hillary said, let it rip. And then it's over and move on. Channel your inner Evie was the subtext of her message to you, and it remains great advice. She was a life giver wherever she went. It's almost ironic considering how much she battled her body. It's almost like she was giving to others her strength. Evie had a way of living in the moment, and in her presence we were learning what to pay attention to. I think this was part of her remarkable creativity, the attention to the present moment and to the details. Like Joan told me, it could be from like examining things at the art fair, which she loved, to knowing in that moment, let's go to the Red Cross truck and basically have a party there, because they were very bored and they would patch up her leg and celebrate. So now, in this moment, we're going to the Red Cross truck. It could range from works of art to creating one's own event, or range from a Jewish community project to a piece of pottery she was creating. But what I think she was most paying attention to, secretly, was you. The reason we all wanted to get on Evie's bus was not just because it was by far the best bus going, and certainly it had the most fearless driver, but because, without fussing over us or calling attention to us, what she was doing the whole time was reading us. She had a remarkable gift of empathy. I think we all experienced it, but with Evie it was so different than with others we're used to. For many, empathy is slowing down, talking about feelings, reassuring and soothing words. For Evie, it meant reading you and taking action. It's like when Prue told me how she was about to be parted from her beloved granddaughter, Sarah, and Evie said, "I'm driving you to the airport," knowing it would be so hard for her. And as Prue told me, Evie knew I was going to break down in tears far before I knew myself. She knew what you needed and gave directions. When Ami died, Evie and Allan were at a prominent conference in Aspen, with Allan set to actively participate and present, and Evie in her usual co-pilot, or perhaps navigator role. Evie told Prue on the phone, "I'm getting on a plane right now because you can't do Shiva by yourself." When she told Allan, Allan was fully supportive of her decision to return to Ann Arbor, at which point Evie announced, "You're coming too." I think we can all imagine Allan graciously replying, "Oh, of course I am, Evie." As Prue said, she knew what you needed and she gave directions. I tried to learn from her. Evie's way of practicing empathy by getting the project going was extraordinary. It didn't diminish you, it didn't focus on you, there was no pity. She knew what you needed, but she didn't make it about you. I believe she was doing all of this all the time, at every moment. I never felt like she was reading me or examining me. I just felt like I was getting on her bus. But in retrospect, I think she was doing it the whole time. I think it's what allowed her to do what I know I definitely could not, which has become fast friends with Joan's ultra-Orthodox Israeli settler cousin. Oy vey, I couldn't do it. But Evie could bond with anyone and quickly. In my case, I experienced this quiet empathy as love. And maybe that was what she was asking from us in return, especially with her illnesses. No pity, no focus on her, but nevertheless living with a deep current of love and empathy running beneath as we seize the beautiful present moment with her adventurousness and that silent bond. But if each of us felt a bond of love with Evie, we all knew where her true bond of love lay, with Allan. Evie and Allan were meant to be. She was so proud of being Allan's wife. She was the guiding hand, as we heard, of Allan's fulfilling so many great works in this world. She loved it. As Allan told me, she loved getting me fixed up just right. And in Evie words, that took a lot of work. No offense. Many of us know the difference between producing excellence and mezzamets in this world lies in getting the fine hidden details exactly right, down to the obscure details like the wording on an invitation. Evie relished it and excelled at it and produced excellence in every aspect. She organized event after event, as we heard from Joan, department dinner after dinner. Through the work of her mind and her hands came insight into who should be promoted, who should be recruited, and I strongly suspect that Allan's great successes, as he said, were due to Evie's guiding hand, if not her outright directness. And I suspect that those joining us today, very possibly through streaming, in oncology leadership in America, and in the radiation oncology leadership in Israel, know the force she was behind the scenes as they mourn with their dear friend Allan and share in his loss. There is a Jewish tradition that our soul passes from our body back to its source in God through the words that the Torah scroll is rolled to. Evie's soul passed from this world through the words of Parashat Shalach Lecha, which is the famous story of the scouts that God and Moses dispatch to scout out the promised land and to bring back word to the people. By the way, before departing, Moses, without explanation, changes the name of one of the scouts. And this is as unusual in the Bible as it is today. Of the 12 scouts, 10 return overwhelmed by the prospect of entering and developing the land, not because of its barrenness, but the opposite. They are overwhelmed by its possibilities. But 2 scouts, a hard and fast pair, including the one whose name has changed, see only possibility, pleading with the Israelites to adopt an adventurous spirit, not to think too much of what could go wrong, but to focus instead on the exciting projects they could devise to change the Jewish community and the world. To me, this is Allan and Evie, the woman who changed her name to living and giving life to others, sometimes at her own expense, who spread her life spirit to us, who taught us how to live, who went forth with a sense of self-possession, independence, and adventurousness, always scouting out the riches and possibilities of the present moment. You know, when I asked Evie with Allan, I said, Evie, do you, like me, think about the afterlife? Because I believe in it. And she waved her hand away and said, oh, Rabbi, let's move on. And I knew exactly what she was saying. She was saying, this world is enough of a promised land for me. Scouting out the riches and possibilities of the present moment, including scouting out us and our possibilities, as she gave life to each moment, transforming the world with her equal and perfect partner, Allan. You know, the scouts in the Torah portion returned to the promised land, carrying an example of the beautiful fruit of the land. Though for them in the Torah it's grapes and pomegranates, I think for Evie it was the beautiful pear. For those who know, she made so many of these perfect pears in pottery. When I look at her many pears now, I think of the beauty she brought to this world and to each of us, and I see her hidden message to us as well. To remember Evie and Allan as her pair. I ask you to rise for El Maleh. El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Ba'meromim, Hamtze Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim, Utehorim, Kezohar Harakia, Mazhirim, L'nishmat Krendo Chava, Bat Yitzchak Udevora, Shehachal Le'olama, Began Eden, Tehei Menuchata, Ana Baal Harachamim, Hastireha B'seter Knafecha Le'olamim, Utror B'tzor HaChayim, Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachlata, V'tanuach B'shalom, Al Mishkava, V'nomar, Amen. Exalted God, who is the source of the flow of compassion, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Evie Lichter, Krendel Chava. She is now returning to her other home in you. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace as her soul continues to be bound up in the bond of the spirits of those in this world, in the world of life. And may she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you continuing on to the interment service, we would ask that once the casket leaves the chapel, you go directly to your cars, drive on your own to the cemetery. We will allow ample time before starting the service. At this time, I'd like to have the pallbearers, please.
And remember that following burial, everyone's invited back here to share stories and to eat some sustenance that Evie arranged.